attorney, and now we expect him to be processed inside of 500 Pearl Street for the next few hours, and then his arraignment is scheduled for noon, where he will be arraigned on those 5 federal corruption charges. Now, to go over those charges briefly again, they include bribery, they include conspiracy, and also campaign finance violations. Now, although Adams didn't say anything while walking in this morning, he has repeatedly denied all of these accusations detailed in that 57-page indictment that was first unsealed yesterday, accusing him of seeking and accepting gifts, campaign contributions from Turkish officials as well as Turkish businessmen, some of those luxury travel accommodations totaling over $100,000, all in exchange for political favors. And these prosecutors allege that this scheme had been almost a decade in the making since he started off in office in Brooklyn as the Brooklyn Borough president, all the way into the present day when he was gearing up to run for mayor a second time. And they said he repeatedly put the interests of foreign nationals above those of his other constituents. Again, this morning, you can see it's a little bit of a media circus behind us. Right when Adams was pulling up, they stopped all traffic on the streets. They even closed off the sidewalks. All the media, we were penned, we couldn't move. We tried to see if Mayor Adams would say a few words, but he just walked right in. And we know that if he is charged, found guilty of all of these charges, he could face up to 45 years in prison. Again, that arraignment is scheduled for noon today, and we are standing by for that. Mary and Cindy.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now we want to go to law professor James Samples from Hofstra University. James, are you with us? Hi, good morning. I'm sure you've been watching everything going on this morning. What is your take on what's happened so far? The mayor just walked into the courthouse.
Well, I mean, it's almost as if New York is experiencing a little bit of a deja vu moment. I mean, this seems to be live breaking coverage on arraignments in New York seems to be a thing in the calendar year 2024. We've been through this with another leading former New Yorker in the form of President Trump. It is unprecedented that we would have this kind of, I mean, it's precedented at this point because it's happened before with Mr. Trump, but now a mayor, the first time, 110 mayors in the history of the city, and no one has ever been indicted while sitting in the office of the New York City mayor. And so this is a kind of moment that is obviously not one to celebrate, but it is one in which what the mayor is facing here is a very serious charge. It is one where he has the presumption of innocence, but in the court of public opinion, unlike Mr. Trump, I don't know that his base of supporters are so loyal. I think this is going to be very hard for him to survive politically. Whether he survives it legally or not is another matter.
You've been talking about those additional cases, political corruption in New York and New Jersey. How does this case compare to the other ones that we have seen, including Senator Menendez?
Well, it's a little bit different in the sense that Senator Menendez, I think, had the tangible evidence that we knew about with regard to Senator Menendez was more compelling, at least in terms of the visuals of it. I mean, gold bars, for example, cars. Here, some of the material, and I think that the mayor's attorneys are going to emphasize this, they already have in some of their statements, is relatively modest. I mean, when you're talking about upgrades, on airline travel, I don't know that that sends the same signal as gold bars. It doesn't sort of speak in that same way. But the fact that what they do have in common is that the aid, the favors, were coming from a foreign national, foreign government. And in the United States, one thing we take very seriously is when foreign individuals interfere in the political process of domestic political process. So doing favors for constituents is one thing. Doing favors for constituents as a quid pro quo is a problem. And when those constituents are not actually constituents but are foreign nationals, it's an even bigger problem.
Let's talk about today's proceedings. The mayor just walked in. Can you walk us through what's going to happen? We know that he's going to ask for a delay, and also, you know, how long things normally take as far as when a court date would be set, let's say.
So today will be a very straightforward proceeding. It'll be before Magistrate Catherine Parker. The mayor will enter a plea of not guilty. There's already a scheduling conference set by Judge Dale Ho for next Friday, October 4th. It appears there's been some reassignment already, maybe a recusal. We don't have a reason specifically, but it appears that Judge Dale Ho, who was a former ACLU voting rights attorney here in New York, will be the judge to whom this case is assigned. That scheduling conference will happen next Friday before Judge Ho, and then we'll see what the timeline is from there.
Political reporter Marcia Kramer is now joining us on set, Professor Sample, and she has a question she'd like to ask you as well.
Professor, I'm wondering what effect you think the recent Supreme Court rulings on public corruption cases could have on this case, because my understanding is that they have to prove a specific quid pro quo. So if the mayor took all of these trips before you had a situation where there was any demand for anything, does that count as a quid pro quo? Or do they have to prove that he got the trips from 2017 and didn't take any action on the fire department thing until, 10 years later?
Well, it's a really good and it's a very important question, Marcia, and I think that the impact of the Supreme Court's recent rulings on corruption is going to be a major focus of what Mayor Adams' team argues in this trial, and that is because over the last 15 years, starting with a case involving Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell, then going through a series of cases, including one involving New Yorker Joseph Percoco, and recently as this summer in Indiana, a mayor in a city within Indiana, a small town, was characterized as receiving a corrupt quid pro quo, but because the money came to that mayor after the fact, and this goes to the heart of your question, Marcia, because the money came after the fact, the Supreme Court ruled that that was, in essence, a gratuity rather than a quid pro quo, and so the corruption conviction was overturned, which is to say that the Supreme Court of the United States in just a 15-year period has dramatically narrowed the scope of what counts as quid pro quo corruption, and that will be favorable. It's certainly what Senator Menendez is going to be arguing on appeal. It's what Mayor Adams will have the ability, because of the timing of his trial, to argue actually at trial.
Well, I was going to ask you a question about the Percoco case, because in that case, they had a situation where they had tapes where he was saying to people, I need 15 boxes of ziti, I need 20 boxes of ziti, which was apparently a shakedown. And yet the Supreme Court overturned his conviction even after he had served time in jail.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And the other aspect of the Percoco case that made it a little bit of a square peg round hole fit to some extent was that he was sort of going in and out of the governor's office, sort of shifting between campaign and actual administration. But yes, you're absolutely right. And as Cindy and Mary and I discussed this morning, the reality here is that because the Supreme Court itself has been so caught up in its own influence issues, Justice Thomas, Justice Alito, flying around on private jets, these vacations with Harlan Crow. This is the kind of fact pattern at issue in Mayor Adams' case is relatively mild when you compare it to the fact patterns that some of our own Supreme Court justices have been facing or have been involved in over the last few years. I think that is it's unlikely, for example, that some of the justices who are quite aware of their own glass houses want to throw stones at a relatively modest matter like Mayor Adams, if this case ever gets that far.
Again, if you're just joining us, we are following a major breaking story. Mayor Eric Adams is in federal court this morning, arriving just a few minutes ago, awaiting arraignment on several charges, including federal bribery, conspiracy, and campaign finance. Let's turn things now to Alice Gaynor. Alice, you've been following this case from the very beginning. You're at federal court. What do you know?
I arrived just as Mayor Adams was pulling up to the courthouse here. My colleague Christina Fan has been telling you what the scene has been like outside all morning. I was struck by the sheer amount of security here at the courthouse. Lately, there have been a lot of high-profile trials. Just last week, we were here for the arraignment of Sean Diddy Combs, but they didn't have the barricades out here quite like they do now. Normally, people can park along the street over there. They can at least stand on the sidewalk. Those are closed off right now, and there are officers all the way down to the other end of of the street here, which we don't normally see. He's not set to be arraigned until about noon, so he's going to be inside for quite some time. He'll be processed. He'll be, once he's before the judge, the magistrate, he'll be read his rights. He will enter a plea. They will ask whether he wants to waive the reading of the indictment of the charges, and typically they do that. He's expected to enter a plea of not guilty. We know he's been adamant that he did nothing wrong, speaking out yesterday at length along with supporters. And when he walked in here this morning, he didn't say anything. You know, what struck me about this morning was I got a notification on my phone when you get memories, you know, from like a year ago. And 1 year ago today, then New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez was arraigned at this very same courthouse on some similar charges that included bribery as well. And we know he was ultimately convicted. But yeah, 1 year ago today, we were here for the arraignment of then New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez. And here we are today for the arraignment of New York City Mayor Eric Adams.
Alice, thank you so much. That's so wild, the exact same day from your memories. Appreciate it. Now we want to go out to Natalie Duddridge, who has been in front of Gracie Mansion for the last 2 days, keeping an eye on Mayor Adams. And Natalie, what's the latest that you have?
Well, Cindy, Mary, what a contrast to yesterday. So we arrived here at 4 o'clock this morning to keep our eye on Gracie Mansion and the mayor's movements. Well, our eagle-eyed photographer, Matt Glassoff, spotted a vehicle that the mayor is often seen riding in at around 8 this morning, traveling down the street, basically undetected. It didn't seem like any media had even noticed that he left. So he snuck out quite quietly. And in fact, a very different scene here right now. Extremely quiet. I mean, one police cruiser here, a couple members of the NYPD. If you remember yesterday's video where those barricades were, just dozens of media protesters arrived. And then at one point, we didn't expect the mayor to come out and speak. So again, a very different situation. And that's what Christina and Alice are now dealing with down at the courthouse. Christina Fan described it as a media circus there. I mean, yesterday morning here at 4 in the morning, the FBI, they were already in and out of Gracie Mansion, and that again was a surprise to everyone. Also a surprise that the mayor came out and spoke. So the mayor spoke yesterday alongside reporters right here. He was urging the public to hold judgment until they heard his defense, but community members showed up, and a number of growing local leaders also outspoken, saying time for him to go. They say that he had become too much of a distraction in the day-to-day operation of the city, and that it was pulling focus from pressing issues. But then we also heard other perspectives that they did not think that this federal indictment would disrupt daily business. So now the question is, as you've been discussing, Cindy and Mary, what comes next for Mayor Adams? That remains uncertain. Public pressure is growing. Again, yesterday there were dueling demonstrators here, and many are wondering if Governor Kathy Hochul will step in. Under New York state law, the governor does have the authority to remove a mayor from office. That move obviously rarely exercised. So if these legal proceedings intensify, she could face growing calls to act. We've also heard from residents here this morning. Some people think that he should step down. Some people think that he should be removed. Well, what would happen next? Public advocate Jumaane Williams would then serve as acting mayor until a special election is held. So for now, Mayor Adams remaining adamant that he will continue leading the city. And again, he departed here from Gracie Mansion just before 8 o'clock this morning. He is now there at the courthouse. We understand he's being processed, and he could still appear. His scheduled arraignment initially set for 12 noon, and it appears that that is all on track. We're here on the Upper East Side. Natalie Duddridge, CBS News, New York.
You. And what comes next for him remains unclear. Marcia, Governor Kathy Hochul can step in here. She called this a difficult day, extraordinarily difficult day for New York City. What are you hearing on that front?
Well, I'm hearing that, as I agree with you, that it's a difficult day for New York, and it's also a difficult time for Governor Hochul, who has to make a big decision about whether or not to actually invoke her powers to remove Mayor Adams. Sources are telling me that her statement last night was, and I quote, a warning shot to the mayor to get his house in order and prove to her and to the people of New York City that he can actually govern. What I'm also hearing is that with all the elections going on and the fact that she's working very hard to try to help the Democrats flip control of the House, she would rather not have to deal with that at this time because she wants to put her energies into helping to turn the House into Democratic control. Also, that's a concern of of Hakeem Jeffries, who's the House Minority Leader. But I think that if the mayor can't prove to her that he can govern, and that's going to mean also being able to fill all those open positions in city government, then she's going to have to step in. But a warning shot.
Very important there. And speaking of, we are talking major positions in city government. And the question is, who will take on those jobs knowing that the Mayor Eric Adams administration may be coming to an end?
Well, I mean, we're talking about the health commissioner, a really big department. We're talking about finding a permanent commissioner for the police department. We're talking about the corporation counsel, the lawyer who represents not only the mayor, but every city agency, and also the council itself. There's the mayor who's talking.
We've been looking at some video. This is not the mayor currently, Marcia. The mayor right now still in federal court. We could be hearing from him, though, after his arraignment. It is scheduled for 12 o'clock. He is in court right now, and we may be hearing additional public comments from him then.
Marcia, I was wondering, you know, so much is going on behind the scenes, and there's a lot of jargon that's coming out that people don't understand. What would you tell viewers as far as we go through this, and this may take a while, what they should know and keep in mind?
Well, what they have to focus on now is whether the mayor can keep his promise that he made yesterday, which is that he's going to govern the city and he's going to let his lawyers handle what goes on. That remains to be seen. As Mary said, there are many positions that he has to fill, and people are going to be wanting to know that that the government goes on and that things they care about, like public safety, educating our kids, and things like that, are going to be able to be handled. Now, remember, he's going to have a turnover in the Department of Education as well, because David Banks is retiring in December, and a new chancellor is going to take over. And there's going to be a period where he's going to try to teach her everything to do for the job, so we'll have to wait and see.
Historic day today, first sitting mayor to appear before a federal judge on criminal charges. We're going to continue to follow this for you throughout the day. Again, an arraignment is scheduled for noon. Any new developments, we'll bring them to you live.
This has been a First Alert